Hey everyone, Zak and Jules here, and we're so excited to be back with you for season 2 of Life After Prison, The Sit Down.
But before we start, we really need your help. Life after prison is nothing without you guys.
All of you listening to us, wherever you are the most important part of life after prison, and we need to hear from you.
And we want to know exactly what you think of the show.
Life After Prison is funded by the National Lottery. And for us to be able to secure more funding, keep the project going, we need to be able to prove to the lottery that you, the Life After Prison community, are loving exactly what we do.
And that you want us to keep Life After Prison going forever.
Forever?
Forever, ever.
Forever, ever. So we've made a small feedback form. It's totally anonymous. We'll be so grateful if as many of you as possible could please complete the form.
It will take you about 3 minutes to complete, and it will help us out so much.
You can find the link to the form in the podcast description or our Instagram bio and on our website, lifeafterprisonpod.com.
Again, thank you so much and enjoy the episode.
Yeah. Some tough subjects are discussed in this episode, and if you're affected by any of this, there are some organisations listed in our show notes who can help.
Okay, Zak. Did you study any courses in prison? And if so, how many?
I did loads, man. At least 10, 12 off the top of my head. I did some like media courses. I did active IQ, like food safety, hygiene, all of that stuff.
Oh, yeah, I did that one.
Is
Smashed
it?
it,
Okay.
well done.
And you?
Yeah, a fair few. A good 10, I think.
That's dope.
Yeah.
Hello and welcome back to Life After Prison, The Sit Down with Zak and Jules.
This is a podcast where we are joined by a guest who shares their journey of life after prison. So today we are joined by a software engineer who is also passionate about prison reform and social justice. So welcome, Josh Rolland.
Thanks, Jules.
Hey, how are you?
Here. I'm good, thank you. I'm good.
We're glad
Thanks
you're
for having
here.
me.
We're glad you're here.
Very glad. Thank
Feeling
you.
good?
Yeah, feeling good. Yeah,
Love
nice
that.
to be back in the big city for a day.
Yeah. Good. We'll go straight in, yeah? So obviously you're a software engineer.
Mm-hmm.
And it's something that you got involved with whilst you was in prison, right?
Yeah. So when I landed in HMP Humber, I was I signed up to the only workshop I thought I might not get as bored as the others in, which was a course called iMedia. It was essentially like below GCSE grade IT. I've been to university, I've done my A-level, did an IT A-level and stuff, so it wasn't making me any more qualified. It was just somewhere that I could mess about with a computer because, computing's always been like one of my passions since young. But about 6 weeks into that course, I'd finished the course. I managed to blag the course leaders to let me stay on for the full 10 weeks I was allowed, even though I finished it in a couple. She used to sit there in a corner with a book, and then there was a poster on the wing saying that there was a workshop opening called Code 4000, and it was the first software development workshop in European prison. There've been like similar things in America in particular. There's a project called The Last Mile, which has got loads of funding from Google, and they've got like C-level execs in Silicon Valley that have got out of that program in California. Yeah. So basically, a workshop trying to replicate that model was launching in the same jail I was in at the right time. And I'd already done like hobbyist software development when I used to WAG school when I was a kid. That's what I used to do, basically, mess around on the computer and play around with codes and stuff like that. So I went in there and took to it like a duck to water, really. Like I already had like a base level of skills. I think I was at an advantage compared to other people because I'd been in education consistently until I finished university and stuff. And I got arrested just before I finished university. Still managed to finish thanks to a long bail.
So coding you were interested in?
Yeah, I was already interested in it, but I'd never really considered it for a career.
Okay.
To be honest, I don't think anyone ever told me when I was young that you get paid really well and don't have to work that hard. Otherwise, I wouldn't have been doing an accounting degree that I hated.
I mean, I didn't think it was that easy.
You don't have to work that hard. It's not easy what you do, but you don't get overworked. You don't have to put extra hours in. It's flexible working time and stuff like that. But yeah, so I was in that workshop in Humber from the day it started. I took to it really well, just took everything like a sponge. Was working on a couple of like projects for static websites for companies, like in network to the guys that set up the workshop and stuff. And yeah, and the journey went from there really, because I got my DCAT, but I was very hesitant to leave this workshop where I was doing something in jail that, I knew that there was nowhere else I was going to move to that was going to be able to give me the level of satisfaction and the level of motivation, and also the possibility for a good career when I got out of jail. I tried to do an MBA, got knocked back by the Open University because I was in a secure unit still. So talking
about that, because you just raised a little point there. Were you surprised about the level of education that was offered in prison?
Was I surprised in a good or bad way?
However, because you touched on that the iMedia course was like just below GCSE level. Were you shocked that was the level that was offered to you, or to everyone in there?
I guess I wasn't really shocked, but it was frustrating, it was really frustrating. I remember every jail I went to, they tried to make me do level 1 maths and English because I didn't have my certificates. I sat there in front of them all and like just point blank refused. But so many people have to do it every time they move jails because the certificates don't follow and stuff. And it's like, it's I've been to university, I am not doing it. Like no chance. Like
it's almost insulting sometimes, isn't it?
Well, it's good that they do it, because, employability rates amongst people without those are like rock bottom and stuff. But I think I was surprised that there was no options if you really wanted to do something better. Obviously you can do the degrees through OU, but I didn't see why I couldn't do a postgraduate degree when they're already offering degrees.
True.
Yeah. There isn't loads of option there. So do you feel like you now now thinking back and landing in that prison, do you think it quite worked out quite well for you?
Yeah, it was sound. Yeah. I really enjoyed my time in prison. It's a bizarre thing to say, and I'm not glorifying it at all. But it was the first time in my life that I managed to put aside the chaos that has always followed me through life. Like I've just always had loads of drama going on in my life. For as long as I can remember, my earliest memories of, I grew up with ADHD and really struggled with just being sat still in the classroom and stuff. And, used to kick off a lot when I was a kid. I had a lot of anger and resentment and stuff. And finally at jail, I just got to be at peace for a bit and just concentrate on what I actually needed to do to better myself, rather than engaging in all this, chaos that I've always engaged in.
It's almost like you get a bit of a break, innit? You get a bit of a
and that can go good or bad for people, right? For people, for me, when it was a time of introspection and growth and stuff, but for a lot of people, it's unfortunately it's not so productive.
I can definitely agree. I can definitely relate to using your time like that, but not having certain options that you'd want to do. Most of the things there wasn't really a massive interest, so it's quite nice that you found that.
Yeah, it's a stroke of luck, innit? But I'll say you make your own luck.
Well, yeah, there you go.
How long did you do, and what was it for? If you don't mind?
I did 2 years, 2 months. So I got 4-4. Possession with intent to supply A, 2 Bs and a C. So it was essentially selling party drugs while I was at university.
So leading up to the sentence, what were you doing? Where was your life at?
I guess I was sort of I was trying to finish my degree when I got arrested. I got arrested in April. I was doing my final exams in May. And was sort of trying to keep my head above water. I was, I might have said it before, but I'm pretty all or nothing. And I got a bit carried away in terms of the lifestyle and stuff. And, ended up escalating much more than I expected it to when I first started, doing some bits and bobs. And I was sort of trying to, keep that going, but also trying to put in some last minute cramming to finish my degree and stuff. And got arrested, ended up deferring half my exams because my head was absolutely shot, to be honest. I had a really tough time on bail, but then up until sentencing, had this time where I was like, do I just crack on and pretend this isn't happening, or do I just like wait until it happens? And to be honest, for a bit I was waiting. I got a graduate job as an assistant financial accountant. I hated it so much.
Oh.
What were you studying at uni?
Accounting and finance.
Did you enjoy it?
No.
Why did you pick that? Is it?
Just thought it's be good money.
Okay.
And I've always been good with numbers. Always been good at like arithmetic and stuff like that. So it made sense, and who knows what they want to do for the rest of their life at 18, and unfortunately you have to choose if you go to university, apparently anyway. But so I got a graduate job, just after I got arrested. My head was just so gone, and I hated I didn't like the job, I didn't like the people, I didn't like the company, I didn't like anything about it. But also I had this going on, Jesus, like
in the background, that must have been
But I was on bail for 13 months. So after a while, I was like, I finished that job after my probation period, after 6 months, mutually terminated that contract. So we were both like, this ain't working. I was like, nah, I'm not coming back again. Yeah. And then I went, to be honest, I had a really tough time just trying to figure out what the hell to do. Did like a bit of part-time work in pubs and stuff like that. Went back to my mum's and was like, went for a full reset. What the hell am I going to do in my life? And like, when am I going to do it? Because I don't know when I'm going to get sentenced. Yeah. And funnily enough, I finally decided, right, I'm going to go to interview on grad schemes for sales jobs. Like, I'm just going to go and do it. I had a mate who like smashed life from the back of it. And when anyway, absolutely knocked it out of the park at this grad scheme. This is assessment day for these sales jobs. And got a job at a finance company, an asset finance company, really good money. Brand new Golf, like 14 miles on the clock, and I'd signed the contract and then got the letter from the court like 2 days later. So finally just been like, you know what, I'm gonna do something. Got the job and then got the letter from court straight away. So I did 6 weeks and then they had to send a car to pick up. They had to send out a pickup truck to get my company car. They were fuming. I wrote a letter for like my mum to post if I got sent down.
Oh man. How did you get into the lifestyle though that led up to the crime?
I guess, to be honest, I'd always been sort of exposed to like drug culture. Growing up, like, where I went to school, a lot of people's parents, like, they were drug addicts and stuff. And I think it was just a bit about when I was growing up and stuff. And, people would be smoking weed at school and, all that sort of stuff. And, I guess I've always drawn towards rebellion because I was diagnosed with ADHD really young. I was so angry about it growing up. I was so angry about how I was treated growing up. Like in primary school, I was sat on my own away from the rest of the class and stuff because the teachers couldn't deal with me and just felt extremely excluded growing up. And I think that had always meant I was just susceptible to just being naughty really. And I got told I was naughty. I got told I had a medical condition that was basically being naughty. So I guess I embraced it and, made it into a bit of a self-fulfilling prophecy. And then when I got to university, started going out to the local club scenes, got into the dance music scene. And, there's a lot of recreational drugs knocking about. So started taking party drugs, going out and stuff. But I knew people who sold big amounts of them and stuff from like growing up and stuff like that. And I had all of these mates who were all buying them, and sort of made sense. And then I got to sort of getting some gratitude from the attention, from the reception from your peers, but like I said, I'm like all or nothing, and I just got deep into it. And the next thing, something that started off as sorting out mates for their nights out and stuff ended up like I was moving like proper weight and stuff like that, and like selling to other dealers and stuff like that, which isn't really what I planned at all really. But by the time I got to getting arrested, I was so deep in it. it was probably a blessing that I got arrested to get me out of it, to be honest. And, I had a bad drug problem by that point, like I had a bad drug addiction. I'll speak about it now, but I was a ketamine addict for years, not a nice drug to be addicted to. But somehow managed to pass my degree despite all of that going on. But it was hard mentally. It was taxing. And
what was it like? What was it like mentally for you?
And I mean, I was like suicidal at times and that sort of stuff. Like I felt completely under the spell of a substance, and and I think the fact that I was unable to perform my studies to a good standard because of this relationship with drugs meant that I just got deeper into the other lifestyle that I was living, because, I had these two things going on. I was doing a degree and, I was selling large amounts of drugs. And, the fact that it was very hard to put your all into the university lifestyle when, you're so ingrained in the partying lifestyle, that I just gravitated towards the other one more than the university. And essentially, I was a full-time drug dealer who was going to uni a couple of times a week, by the end of it.
So it's like a double life, isn't it?
Yeah, basically.
That must have been so hard. Did you get any help, in prison or on release for
mental health wise?
And for drug addiction.
Yeah, well, so getting arrested, it took me a few months before I properly knocked it on the head, because I got arrested because I was intoxicated and someone clocked it, phoned the police. I had loads of drugs on me. Basically, like, I was clearly intoxicated. Someone's phoned the police. I was on the way back from picking up, caught red-handed, man. The police couldn't believe it. So I was deep into it when I got arrested. Took 6 months before I managed to get myself off it. Stayed clean until I went down, and obviously stayed clean in jail anyway. But I had access, like, support before that. To be honest, my university were absolutely phenomenal with the fact that I had a drug addiction. Like I went to uni one day and just told, we had like a student support officer, and I just told her, I'm a drug addict, like I'm really struggling. And she said, right, come with me, and took me to a rehab clinic down the road.
Wow.
Like literally on the spot. And I went there a bit and stuff, and inside I didn't need it by the time I got sent down, thankfully. But yeah, I haven't needed that support since, thankfully. But it wasn't easy. It wasn't easy to stop something that you've been doing for, like 3 or 4 years, as much as I was doing. But I think, if anything's going to make you change, it's getting arrested and facing loads of jail.
Well, thank you for sharing that. And yeah, it's sometimes a massive wake-up call, isn't it?
Yeah, definitely.
So you've been sentenced and you're facing 4 years, you said 4 months.
Mm-hmm.
Where can you see your life heading now? So now that you're facing this, what could you see?
As if I'm in jail and I'm at the start of my sentence.
Yeah. So now can you see positivity? Like what can you see?
You know what? I think I was very much focused in the present during my time. And actually I did a lot of the reading I was doing at the time was around sort of doing everything you can in the present to make sure that the future pans out how you want it to. I didn't really pay as much attention to what the goals were, I guess, or what the outcome might be. It was more, what can I do right now to make sure that there is going to be some opportunity for me in the future. And I think I very much spent my whole sentence like that. And, it did, it panned out well for me. But I mean, I guess really you're just like in a bit of despair, aren't you, when you actually think properly about the fact, I'm in jail, and the fact that I just got a mint job as well just before I got sent down. It was a bit like, I could just be smashing it in that job. I was never gonna reoffend. It wasn't on the cards at all. But now I've got to do 2 years in jail when I'd have been smashing it in that job, driving around in my brand new car. But
well, you just said that reoffending weren't on the cards for you. Why wasn't it on the cards for you?
I think a big part of it, like as much as the fact, I mean, I had options, I did have, I'd always been career ambitious, even though I'd put that to one side because of, you know, my personal circumstances around drugs and because of, you know, the selling drugs as well. I never really once during that time thought this is it forever. Never at all. I always knew that somehow, I didn't know how, but I knew I was going to leave it behind. And, you know, and obviously the point of getting arrested, that was the point I was leaving it behind.
Okay.
You know.
What made you like want to get to the books and stuff inside prison, but not really do it at uni and before? Is it just what it was, what you were learning about?
Yeah, I think so. And I guess, to be honest, the moment I got sentenced, I was like, right, I'm on a mission.
Okay.
I was tunnel vision. I was like, I'm just like,
I need to get out.
Yeah. Well, I need to make sure that I build stuff. And whether that is just, you know, reading about some marketing book in case I come across a marketing opportunity, whether it's, you know, reading about the art of persuasion and stuff like that in case, you know, went into sales. Like I was just, you know, digesting information and, you know, just trying to learn anything I could that I thought might be useful when I got out. Obviously, once I got into the coding workshop, I managed to sort of zone in on something like particular, but at first it was more just like, and I think, to be honest, it was also an opportunity because I've always been big on reading. Like, I mean, when I was young, I didn't used to sleep well and stuff. I used to stay up all night reading, like all throughout my whole childhood. And then when I went to university and stuff, like I left all that behind because I was always just doing mad stuff. And it was nice to just be able to get back to reading again, to be honest. Yeah.
So then obviously you mentioned, you know, getting your DCAT.
Yeah.
What was progression? What was your progression like through that system?
Well, when I was still in Humber,
yeah,
we used to get visitors coming to the workshop, like people from people from the tech industry and stuff. And the guys used to come over from the Ministry of Justice. I got a digital team in Sheffield, and and the guys used to come over every now and then and do like workshops around, you know, like teachers around certain subjects around tech and the culture in the industry and stuff like that. And so when they came in and I was up for my DCAT, I was hounding them. I was like, do you know someone I can work for in South Yorkshire? Do you know someone who'll give will work with an ex-com? And one of them said, sure, I've seen a post on social media. If I can find it, I'll forward the name of the company. So he did anyway, but I hadn't got my DCAT yet. And I actually got knocked back the first time. And I sent like a 2.5 page letter to the head of OMU and told them how if I wasn't getting DCAT, no one in this jail should ever get DCAT, which is obviously, you know, ludicrous. And got my DCAT off the back of it. Because
they're a bit funny sometimes, isn't it?
Yeah, Humber at that point in time were really bad, and it was just before. I don't know if you know, but like it would have been while I was inside. They changed the laws around, like everybody got tagged, and everybody had to start getting DCAT because there weren't enough people moving through.
Yeah,
but this was just before that. So then after that, everyone was getting DCAT from Humber, but I was one of the last ones, and you know, I wasn't having a bar of it basically. Like you know,
it sounded like you had to put in some graft for that.
Yeah, well. I mean, I just sat there in my cell, wrote a letter, you know, clearly explaining the reasons why I should be getting a DCAT. You know,
it's proactive. It's great.
Yeah, and you know, it was all good off the back of that. But going back to the thing about like getting a job and stuff. Yeah. So I got this company's name. Finally got my DCAT. Yeah. Wrote to this company. The guy comes in to see me in the jail, and this social media post this guy had seen was like 5 years before. So, you know, it's a miracle that he could remember it. But they took on a YO before, who'd just been released, and not done anything since with like prisoners or anything. In fact, they really downsized the company. But they took me on a volunteer basis because they only worked with not-for-profit clients. Okay. So I got like a volunteer office through one of their clients, working on their clients' work. This was for when I went to DCAT. Cool. The thing was, I was working on a really big project in HMP Humber, and I wanted to finish it because like I knew it was going to be good for my career development. So I actually, after writing this letter and getting my DCAT, I then told the jail that I had to stay for another 3 months. Okay. and it got rejected at first. I got the workshop manager to back it and stuff.
A guy who knows what he wants.
And they let me stay for 3 months. And in fact, it went to the top governor, basically. The head of OMU refused it, and I put it to the top governor.
Yeah.
And she was really, this workshop was quite a big deal for the prison. And she was well behind it and stuff. We had loads of high up people from the MOJ coming in to visit and stuff like that. So, they obviously, she wanted people to be getting the most out of it and stuff. So so I did an extra 3 months in CCAT before I went to DCAT.
Well
Didn't
done,
realise though, but I wasn't even eligible for ROTL yet. So actually it killed all my non-eligible time for ROTL, so I weren't just sat like in the jail not getting ROTL.
Yeah, because there was the lie down period.
Yeah, and they got rid of that as well, I think.
That's gone.
Yeah.
So
Has
now,
it?
so now
Wow.
basically it's like as soon as your paperwork's done.
Yeah. But it was like then it was you could only get ROTL in the last quarter of your sentence.
Yeah, last 9 months.
Yeah.
Is that still a thing then?
No, that's gone.
No.
Really?
Yeah, that's
Yeah.
gone. It's as soon as your
So you got
paperwork's
people
done.
who are getting a couple of years and just going straight to
home.
DCAT
Yeah.
and going home again. It's mad, isn't it?
And what so obviously this opportunity for working for this non-profit organization, right?
Yeah. Yumi, by the way, I want to
Yes.
big up Yumi, like Andy and Nicola. Like I still see them now. Like when after I moved back to Sheffield a couple of months ago, we went out for some food.
Nice.
Not food.
Oh, I
we,
love
we
that.
had drinks. We didn't have food. Next time we're having food.
No, it's not. So tell us
Yeah,
about
it's nice.
so then this opportunity came about from inside the
Yeah.
in the Cat C prison, in the closed
Yeah.
prison,
Yeah.
and then obviously now you're out there in the open prison, the DCAT.
Yeah.
That's where you get the chance to do this
Yeah,
work.
but to be honest, it wasn't like it was straightforward.
Okay.
Like I was at the head of OMU's door every day, saying, "Get me out." I landed in the jail with a job offer, and it took. I mean, so I got to that. I got to Hatfield in March, and I started at Yumi on the 1st of October.
Ooh, 8 months,
Yes, 7-8 months.
7-8
yeah.
months.
And obviously I had my 3 month lie down to do.
Yes.
Finished that in June. So I was going out on ROTL and stuff like
Yeah.
that, but I didn't get to start the job for another 4 months after I started my ROTL. And mate, I mean, to be honest, the head of OMU apologized to me when I got released for delaying it, because he admitted that he did it on purpose because there's a level of distrust there. And fair enough.
But that should be an individual basis.
Yeah,
right?
I know. But to be fair to him, I was glad he did that, but it didn't make it any better for me. But at least, hopefully next time it wouldn't be so skeptical. But I don't know what his problem with it was. But he says, when you've done the job for 40 years, you do lose your trust, and whatever. But
I guess that's
it weren't
one of
good for me. But I still managed to do. I think I was with Yumi for. I would have been there for 9 months before I got released. So commuting from Doncaster to Sheffield every day, God, it was long. It was so long.
That must have felt good though, innit?
Yeah, it was mint. It was mint.
So
I was out there. It was great.
So you see at Yumi, yeah. Obviously, I did a bit of research on you. Checked
Yeah.
out your blog. Checked out your blog and that.
Yeah.
And you mentioned meeting some senior people from Metro Bank, I think.
Yeah,
Tell us about that.
yeah. So obviously the company who I was doing the workshop with in Humber, they were called Code 4000.
Yeah.
And their CEO at the time came to visit me in the office in Sheffield where I was working, and he sort of tentatively said, I've got a potential opportunity there, but I need to run some logistics by you as it's in London. And I was like, yeah, I'm on it. And he was like, what, you just moved to London? I was like, I was going to move to London. Where else am I going to get a job in tech after jail? Like, I'm going to have to go to London, aren't I? So he was like, right, sound. And then it was, so there's the COO of Metro Bank was a associate of the CEO of Code 4000. So, so Paul Riseborough, the COO of Metro Bank, asked if I could go and meet him for a sort of I guess vetting interview. It was definitely more of a vetting procedure than an actual interview sort of thing, because obviously there is, he, as a director of a big, I mean, they're on the stock exchange and stuff, they're a big company, obviously he wants to make sure that that I'm all right before he starts putting me into like proper interviews and stuff.
Of course.
So I was actually going down to London for most of my weekend rottles at the time, because that's where my network was and stuff like that. So I was like splitting it between the north and then going down to London and seeing, like, catching up with friends and stuff like that. So I went down to meet Paul Riseborough in, I think it was January. January, and I was getting released in the July. So this is like 6 months ahead of release, and obviously it's all a bit surreal. But you know, I'm going down to London and like meeting a bank executive when I've just been like chilling with my boy who's a lifer the day before, and you know, it's like whatever, you know, go there and, you know, pretend I've been speaking with bank execs for the last 2 years.
I was going to ask, how did that make you feel going from a prison to, you know, a corporate environment?
Well, I think I didn't want to tell you, right, when you go to DCAT that it's weird enough for getting on the bus and like I remember getting on the bus for the first time. I can't even speak to the bus driver and like, what do I do? Like, do I call him sir? Do I call him Gov? Like, what goes on here? You call every woman Miss when you're in DCAT. Walking into this interview like, excuse me, Miss and Miss Paul, like, you know. But I guess it was surreal, but at the same time, I'm quite calm and grounded and stuff, and you know, I've got a background where, you know, I've been in corporate before and stuff. You know, I had some jobs in corporate companies and around finance and stuff like here and there during my past. So, but it was still weird, and I was still like, obviously, I mean, rusty isn't even the word after a couple of years inside, but yeah, it was good. I enjoyed it. You know, Paul was a good guy. It made me feel comfortable anyway. And you know, we spoke about life and what I wanted from life and stuff like that. And I think that was the most important thing for him. It was to understand, look at me and glean who I am. Yeah. Not what I've done. Not like, you know, I mean, more what I might do because of who I am, but, you know, to see who I am now and stuff, and, you know, who I was by then was an extremely different person to the chaotic guy who was running about, like, you know, doing all this stupid stuff when I was younger. And then I got invited for an actual interview with some tech guys, and that was I guess that's pretty standard. Like in tech, you'll normally do an interview with some tech guys, and then you'll get through to, like, you know, who you'll be a manager and stuff, and for a final interview. So I went down again on my next rottle, which would have been my birthday in February.
Okay.
Would it, or was it in March? I think it was in March. Anyway, went and met these guys, the tech guys and stuff, and obviously I was at a very junior level because you know, I've been in a prison workshop with no internet, like learning how to you know, make things for the internet, which obviously comes in its own challenges. And like, you know, we used to write coding ourselves and stuff, you know, and then go and type it into the computers. And stuff,
that's,
you know,
pretty cool.
And me and because my next door neighbour who was on the same course, just, you know, everyone's always shouting through the wall anyway. But
they're just shouting coding. Everyone else is shouting Love Island.
Yeah,
that's jokes.
Forget about all that stuff though. You know, I don't think about it that often. You know,
that's
it's so long ago now.
Hey, did you get that? Yo, bro. You know that code and
like everyone's banging on the door when the football is on. Well, I'm banging on the wall. I've done it. I've cracked it.
That's brilliant.
Funny times.
That is actually brilliant.
I was going to ask you, in that process, did you feel uncomfortable about, you know, disclosing your conviction or talking about it?
I was extremely lucky because of the circumstances around my employment. Extremely lucky. And I mean, it was something I was dreading, you know, because I mean, I guess not dreading because I was gonna find a job, you know, I wasn't gonna let it go any other way, sort of thing. I was gonna apply. I'd have applied to 1,000 jobs, you know, I'd have got one of them. Like, of course, at some point, somebody's gonna give you a chance, but you know, it was something that obviously you put that, and I think that was what the feeling of relief was about, really, because I knew that I was building the skill set. I knew that in terms of like my interview skills and stuff like that, like I could have a good chat with anyone and, you know, end up hopefully getting a job off the back of it. But there was this element of it that was out of my control. Yeah. And that was whether or not I'd even get in front of them because of my criminal records.
True.
So I think that was probably the sense of relief, was as much about that, because I mean, there was, you know, I guess some divine intervention happened and I didn't even have to worry about that in the end. But it was something that was obviously stressing me out at that point. At that point when I first got told about the job, it was already then that I was thinking about starting to apply for other stuff. and during my time at work. But since then, I've changed jobs once since then.
Did you have any problems with it in this new role?
Didn't tell them until I got an offer.
Okay.
Didn't disclose it until an offer was on the table. And they wanted me in by that point.
How did it go down?
I got a phone call off the recruiter, and she said, well, we're going to do, we just need to do some criminal records checks, so everything will be all good when it. I said, well, actually, and she's like, what? And to be fair, me and this recruiter had a good vibe anyway, so it was all right.
Do you feel like being open and honest is the best bet?
To be honest, you know what? I mean, I'm not, I think so, but I think there is a time and a place for the honesty as well.
Yeah.
Don't do it at a point where it's going to shoot yourself in the foot.
It's a feeling, isn't
until
it?
you actually have to disclose something, don't disclose it. It's much easier to convince someone that you're worth taking a punt on when you've already convinced them that before they knew about the criminal record. So
I know what you mean.
I think, advice to anyone going for a job for a criminal record, don't tell them until they ask. Basically, because you're not doing anything wrong by not disclosing it at any point. But there's been other jobs when I was applying for the workshop where I work now. There was a couple where you have to have a DBS check before they consider you, because there was a couple for big contracting firms, and they can place you with all sorts of different clients. Some of the clients you need to have a DBS check for, but even then, some of them were willing to go out their way to find a way around it, because I'd managed to convince the recruiter before telling them that I was going to be good for the job. So then when you've convinced them that, they're thinking, well, doesn't matter if he's got a criminal record. I already think he's good at the job,
Yeah.
So but I think I'm quite lucky. So technology is quite a progressive industry and stuff. There are some industries where it's going to be a no-go. I think if I tried to go back into finance, it'd been hell.
Tell us about CodeAtt and what you're doing now.
Yeah, so...
Did I say it right? Yeah, CodeAtt, yeah?
Yeah, cool. Actually, it was proposed by a Londoner who said it sounds good if you got a London accent when you say it.
It does. It does sound good still. It does.
I guess it was during, actually, just after COVID kicked in. After the first lockdown started, I had a catch up with the former CEO of Code 4000, and we'd kept in touch quite a bit and stuff, because he had, he had personal interest in my journey as well as professional. But he'd left Code 4000 for some other work, and he'd been in touch with another guy who was on my wing and in the workshop with me, who'd gone self-employed when he got released as just a small agency making websites for, to be fair, a lot of government companies and not-for-profits and stuff like that. Anyway, they've been talking a bit about the idea of setting something similar to Code 4000 up, but with a bit more onus on employment pipelines on release and on soft skill training as well as technical training. As I think the three of us in particular were quite aware of the fact that a lot of people that were going through this program weren't actually going to do well in job interviews and stuff like that, and wouldn't necessarily just fit straight into a corporate environment and stuff. So we started talking about what we could do and how we could make it work, but particularly around London, because of the socioeconomic challenges in London and stuff, and the offending rates amongst young people and stuff. As Tarek, my co-founder, he was doing a lot of work in Wandsworth and stuff, and it was hearing lads just saying they got into crime because they didn't have any other option. Basically, it was the best way they knew to make money, because that was what the guy who was driving the nice car from across the road was driving. So we wanted to do something similar in London that was really getting people properly ready for jobs and into jobs. We started working on CodeAtt. It would have been about 2 years ago. But we spent a long time fleshing out how we wanted it to look. Making sure that we were walking before we were running, and spent a lot of time getting a lot of advice and building out employment partnerships and getting key stakeholders involved and stuff. So the program's been running it's on quite a small level at the moment on a pilot. So working with some organisations around London, but it's not just about prison. It's sort of got three parts to it. It's serving prisoners, prison leavers, and young people at risk of crime.
Okay.
So I don't know if you've heard of the London Village Network, but we've got a partnership with them, and they're, once we get some more funding and start to up the scheme off the back of the pilot, we're hoping to be able to work in some community hubs across London, and trying to give people that option, so they don't end up just pursuing crime in the first place as a means of making money. So at the moment we're we're sort of in that post-incubation stage, just launching a pilot, we've got, to be fair, this year's a big year because we've got, obviously, a nice slow things move in jail. So it's a snail's pace. We're waiting for big finalization with a couple of jails in areas where we feel like we can make a big impact. And commercially we're partnered with some absolute titans, but I'm not allowed to just go around saying names, unfortunately. But there's
we'll talk about that after.
There's some really exciting stuff to come out, and ultimately we do have jobs lined up for people. We already have these employment partnerships. I built the curriculum myself, so if there's any problems, come to me.
No, that sounds really good. I'm not going to lie. That sounds good.
How popular is it so far?
So I mean, obviously with the pilot stage, it's just been rolled out to a limited amount of people. But I mean, the interest from the prisons that we're trying to launch in, they see, particularly in the YOs, they think it'll be full immediately. And
that's wicked.
They're looking at trying to scale it on a big level, and there are some big scalability plans as well. But I mean, Code 4000 in Humber, it was, everybody wanted to be in that workshop. Everyone did, because it's something so different from the rest of the jail. But obviously, jails are getting more digital and stuff, and that means that there are opportunities to get this out to more and more people. Obviously, you need to make sure that you've got the opportunities afterwards, because we don't want to just train people up and then it just be like any other course in jail where you go and do some training, you get promised that you'll get a job out of it, and then you get absolutely nothing out of it. Yeah.
Or it's pretty much the same thing all the time. Very limited. So. Yeah. It's so nice to hear that the variety is coming. Yeah,
and this thing that we're talking about employers and stuff, I think people are becoming so much more open to this sort of thing. And I've been doing quite a bit of work with the New Futures Network from the Ministry of Justice in the past and stuff, and sat in on meetings with companies who are interested in taking on people from the prisons and stuff. And I think attitudes are changing. I think public perception is changing. I think that over the next few years, there will be more and more opportunities for people. But, it is about, I guess it's about bringing those opportunities to people that's the issue.
So then in future, where do you see CodeAtt then?
I'm hoping, to be honest, I'm hoping that within a couple of years, programs in at least 3 jails, having placed, well into double figures. People in employment. I think once we're into 3 jails, we can probably hope to be seeing a couple of cohorts a year who are at least put in front of people and interviewed, and hopefully a decent amount of them, will get the job thanks to the preparation that we're going to do around the interviews, and making sure that culturally they know what's expected of them and stuff. But to be honest, even if it just got a couple of people, to completely turn it around, it'd still be
well worth it. Yeah,
but ultimately, I think it'll grow. The tech industry is growing. The skills gap in tech. There aren't enough people for the jobs out there and stuff. The UK doesn't produce enough junior software engineers compared to other countries, and the industry is going to keep growing, and I don't think that there is many industries that you could offer to someone that they'd be as keen to work in. And also, I think it makes sense for the government to be behind schemes like this, and they are really behind it. You know, they absolutely love that something cutting edge is being put into jails and stuff. And you know, it wouldn't surprise me if there's opportunities to scale it globally. To be honest, at some point, you know, there are stuff like this working in other countries and stuff, and you know, we spoke to stakeholders in other countries who are like really interested, who'd love to see something like this in their own you know, within their own prison systems.
Sounds amazing, man.
Yeah, that's really cool.
Keep us updated.
Yeah, of course. I mean, to be honest, I'm hoping to be shouting from the rooftops by the end of this year, because the problem is, you know, especially because of the sort of, you know, the sectors that we're working around and who the stakeholders are and stuff. Got to keep so much quiet. It's well annoying.
I like the sound of the plan though. So good luck.
Yeah,
and
man.
we're looking forward to hearing it.
Thanks, guys.
Just before we mention some organizations that can help people when released from prison, just wanted to ask if there's any organization that you wanted to shout out and recommend, or any that have helped you.
Well, obviously CodeAtt, but you know, Code 4000 as well. You know, I wouldn't be here without them. Like, it's, you know, it's crazy to think, to be honest. You know, other good organisations. I really like what Tempus Novo do. You know, up in the north in particular, they're doing some really good work getting people into jobs, and place a lot of people from my open prison into work as well. And Prison Reform Trust, I've been in touch with them a lot recently. They're doing great work. Bounce Back, they're doing great work also. And you know, I hope that more organisations keep popping up who are actually getting these results. Yeah.
Thanks for sharing those.
Yeah, thank you. You've named quite a few, which is really great. Thank you. A few more: St. Giles Trust. They provide employment support for adults that have been in prison. They're only in certain areas though, so do check with them or probation to see if they can support you. There's Catch 22. They can help you once released in quite a few different areas, such as employment, gangs, rehabilitation. Again, though, they are in certain areas, so check the show notes. And also Employment for All. So this organisation is London-based, and they really dedicate their time and support to match skills with employment opportunities. So check them out.
Yeah, and you know, Josh, you'd mentioned, you know, about disclosing. You know, talking about disclosure, and we've actually got a Getting Out episode, which is our other podcast, where we got advice from Debbie Sadler from Unlock about disclosing your convictions, when and how, and what you need to know about that. We've got another episode of Getting Out where we talk about housing and how you discussing your options when getting released. So if you have, you know, any issues or problems with disclosing your offence or housing, check out those episodes.
And we really do love hearing from you guys. So please keep getting in touch. So this is a message from someone that I spent time with inside, and she is very special to me. And I wanted to read out what she said. She said, "I'm always looking on my Insta at the podcast. I love watching it. It's so inspirational and a relaxed vibe. It helps me a lot with my mental well-being, even if it just makes me laugh or puts a smile on my face. Like when Zak did his favourite memories, got me thinking of all the jokes we used to have with all of us girls. But really, it does help me a lot and makes me focus on my flowers and why I can't give up." And that's from Claire. I absolutely love this message, and I miss all the laughs and jokes. Too sounds crazy to say you miss jail, but I do miss those.
That's an element you miss, right?
Yeah, and I completely remember sitting in our pad thinking about how I wanted to be a successful PT of my own business, and you with your flowers as well. So don't give up.
Yeah.
Keep that going. And I just wanted to shout out her partner, Matty, okay? Matty, I always used to hear so much about you. Claire and your little girl are waiting for you on the out.
Yeah, man. Big up, Claire. Shout out to Matty as well. Keep your head down.
And your little girl.
Yeah. No, that's a really nice message.
Yeah.
So please do, like, if you want to get in touch with us, as other people did, we really want to hear from you. You can get in touch with us by DMing us on Instagram and Twitter at AfterPrisonPod. Or if you prefer to send an email, you can send an email to podcasts@prison.radio. You can also leave us a voice note on our website, lifeafterprisonpod.com. But if you prefer to write, you can write to us at National Prison Radio, Life After Prison, HMP Brixton, London, SW2 5XF.
So a massive thank you to you, Josh, for joining us today.
Yeah, thanks, Josh, man. No, it's been really good.
Yeah, it has been.
Really good.
A massive thank you to you guys listening. Please don't forget to like, share, and subscribe. It's really helping everyone find the podcast, and we'll see you next time.
Take care.